safe to say that maybe finally winter is coming. How exciting. I'll just do a couple of housekeeping first of all. Could you please check that your mobile phones are switched off? And also our restrooms are down the stairs. There's a small door partially hidden just after the counter, and it'll take you downstairs to our restrooms. And also, if you haven't had any books signed yet by Jackie French, she is very happy to stay behind after our talk this evening, and you can have your book signed. Okay. Blessed are the book givers. They make our futures good. So said Jackie. And on reading that, I thought, well, I'm a book giver. I love to give books, but blessed are the book writers because they enrich our lives. And tonight we could have sold twice as many tickets because you are like-minded. You also believe that book writers enrich our lives, and that's why we're here to hear Jackie talk this evening. And for someone whose writing, whose words have touched so many of us, I saw an interesting piece about you in a paper, and it summed you up in numbers. It was quite delightful, though. It wasn't awful. And it talked about 25, the span of your writing career, 148, the number of wombats, 140, the books, 36 languages that you've been translated into, 3,721 bush rats, and 60, the number of awards and accolades you've received over the course of your career in Australia and overseas. And of course, those numbers added up tell the story of a prolific but passionate children's writer. But what they don't tell you is the tireless advocate for children's literacy for all children. And they also don't tell us that Jackie French is a beloved part of many a bedtime routine here in Australia. I'm going to introduce Jenny from Booklink. While you might know that Jackie was Senior Australian of the Year last year and also Australian Children's Laureate, she's also become patron of Booklink, which is a marvellous organisation that I'll let Jenny tell you all about. So could you please welcome Jenny Stubbs to the floor? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I acknowledge the Turrbal people as the traditional owners of the land where we gather today and recognise that this land has always been under their custodianship. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I also extend respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. As President of Booklinks, I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight as we celebrate the new patronage of our organisation by Jackie French. Our vision is to develop generations of literate young people who appreciate all forms of story and how story is created. To do this, our main objectives are to establish and grow vibrant spaces to nurture communities where young people are exposed to literature, stimulated to be imaginative and artistic, and where stories and their creators are valued. To support networking, events, learning, and an appreciation of story through the community, and to promote authors, illustrators and storytellers for young people. Who better to spread the word about our organisation and help us towards our goals than Jackie French? Jackie grew up in Queensland, and Booklinks has had a closer relationship with her over a number of years, launching her book A Day to Remember, having a book gig for Rose for the Anzac Boys at the Brisbane Writers Festival, and more recently developing the Jackie French travelling suitcases, which are now in each state and territory and are being lent free to all schools and public libraries. In 2014-15, Australian Children's Laureate, 2015 Senior Australian of the Year, Member of the Order of Australia for significant services to literature as an author of children's books and as an advocate for improved youth literacy. I invite Jackie to address us tonight on the power of story and how politicians ignore it at their peril.
We are the people of the books, and that matters. It matters extraordinarily. A few years ago, even 5 years ago, loving books was seen as something rather fuzzily good. We thought it was a good thing if kids read, but we didn't know why. In these days when teacher librarians are becoming an endangered species, when it is seen as more valuable to reduce class numbers by even 3 kids per teacher than have a teacher librarian, in these days when the Unproductivity Commission is trying to destroy the Australian book industry, on the peculiar claim that the industry is too successful and so is taking skilled people from places where they might be more productively employed, which I have to say is one of the most peculiar things I've actually ever heard. We need to be able to say why books matter, why we are involved not just with only words. If it is only words, what are any of us doing here? What we do matters. In the last 5 years, using MRI scans, we now know that every time a child reads a book, literally new neurons are created in their brains and new connections between those neurons. It's not something nice and fuzzy that books are good for kids. We now know that reading is literally muscle building for the brain. It's just like an athlete pumping iron and their muscles get bigger. If you want intelligent children, give them books. And by the way, that works even when you're 90, but it works even more when the brain is actively growing. In other words, from 0 to 3 and as adolescence and early teenagerhood. Reading matters. But reading matters for more than that. Because with every book that a child reads, they are every character in that book. Human beings are not born with empathy. It is a learnt skill. If we want compassionate adults, give our children books, because every book they read, they are every character in that book. This matters. But it also matters because if we want adults in 10 or 20 years' time who can invent machines to mine the asteroids, if we truly do want an innovative Australia, then we need kids who have learnt to create, who know how to flex their creative muscles. And this, I think, is economically probably the most important thing that a book can do. If we want an Australia where we are not shooting each other, if we want an Australia where our kids, our adults, are truly innovative and think what they can be, we need to give our kids books. At the moment, it's more or less a cliche that Australian literature teaches us who we are. Well, in fact, kids don't have much choice about who they are. Their families and their school life pretty much dictates how they will spend just about every part of every day. They've got very little choice. As a children's author, all of you who give books to kids, our job is, yes, to show children who they are as Australians, but even more importantly, our job is to show them what they can be, that they have got choices, that no, tomorrow may not be like today. But that doesn't matter. Do not be afraid that every person here, just like every child that I speak to, is descended from the descendants of those who survived the last ice age. In the last ice age, most of humanity and our sort of non-human cousins perished. There was a human bottleneck. Our ancestors survived. Our ancestors are the ones who survived countless wars. Our ancestors are part of the 18% of humans who did not die in the bubonic plague, in the series of bubonic plagues. We are descended from heroes. or people who are very good at running fast, or hiding, or people who are very good at smiling and actually saying, no, please do not kill me, I'm sure we can cooperate on this. We are descended from people with incredibly good genes, so one thing humanity is not good at is being bored. Humans do extraordinarily stupid things when they are bored. And this is something that books give kids. It is the knowledge that, no, tomorrow may not be like yesterday. Every generation will find their own challenges. But this is what we can give kids. The knowledge that, yes, humans are good at climate change. Humans are good at challenges. And the more challenges you accept and do something about, the more fulfilling that your life becomes. Our job is to show kids what they can be and that they have got a choice. Which is why I've been reading this to kids for about the last 2 years, to see what they respond. It's a few paragraphs from Pennies for Hitler. Pennies for Hitler is about a boy called Georg in Hitler's Germany who thinks Hitler is wonderful. He admires him enormously. His parents are apolitical. His father is a professor of poetry. But his grandfather was Jewish. When his father's students find out that, they throw him out of a second-story window. He is killed. Georg must be smuggled out of Germany. If he is discovered, not only would he be sent to a camp, but the people who helped him as well. In England, he is the enemy. So Georg must not exist. He must pretend to be a boy called George. The bombs start falling. He is sent on one of the 2 children's evacuation ships to Australia. But even in Australia, Georg is the enemy. Georg cannot exist. He must pretend to be George. And towards the end of the book, he finally admits to his foster parents that he is Georg. He is not George. He is an enemy. And by then Japan has entered the war, and finally there is an enemy who is not him. He is free to hate. He realizes that hate is actually like pennies falling down against each other. Hatred is contagious. That is how Hitler did it. Hatred spreads from person to person. Look at that small angry man screaming hatred. Look at the people in front of him. Hatred spreads from person to person. But in Australia, Georg has also learnt that kindness is contagious too. And at the end of the book, there is a scene where Georg has run into the bush, having admitted he is Georg. And I'll read it. Then he heard the plane. He turned to find it, but it was too late. The sky exploded, a ball of fire as though a star had fallen. Something else moved now. A white flutter in the sky like a giant moth, coming to ground again with the dawning light. But this moth was a man in a parachute, drifting slowly as the debris fell. An enemy. He pushed his body again, lurching through the trees as the white of the parachute vanished. Enemy, enemy. Mr. Peasegake's words sang through his head, if I could get my hands on one of them. He didn't think what he would do when he found him. He was beyond thought now. Then there it was, a crumple of white that looked like it had been dragged along the clearing. A man half buried in cloth. All Georg could see was his leather flying helmet, his face, the oriental eyes. Then he saw the blood. It welled from what looked like a crease on the man's neck. Georg had a sudden vision of bombed-out London, of flying debris that ripped through flesh. Of Elizabeth, the life seeping from her as they dragged her from the dirt. The enemy didn't move, but he was alive. That's what they told you in first aid books. If the blood flowed, they were alive. He could kill an enemy, feed the hate inside him, give a gift of hate to the Peaselakes and to Maud. He looked around for a weapon, a branch, a rock. The rock stared up at him, jagged, dusty, as though it had been put there for him to use. He lifted it, felt his hands grow big with power. He stepped towards the man. He held the rock high above his head, ready to smash it down. The enemy groaned. It was a small sound, a whisper almost too soft to hear. It was a human sound, the first he had heard all the long night, except his own panting and the thud of his feet. So we've got a boy here who has nothing. His family, his country, even his identity have been stolen from him. Which is more powerful, hatred or kindness? What is this boy going to do? Is he going to choose to kill the enemy, or is he going to save the man's life? Shall we vote? Who says that he will kill him? Who says he will save the man's life? Okay. I've read that now to more than 100,000 kids. Only 3 have said that he will kill the enemy. One of them was actually only about 6 weeks ago, and I have to say, a young man I would not like to meet in a dark alley. The other 2 boys were in Western Sydney. They were in a room of 200 students, and 198 of them voting that he will save the man's life. These 2 boys, about 14 years old, were holding each other's hands to put their hands up. They were terrified. They each had tears rolling down their faces, but they believed it was the duty to kill an enemy, and they were terrified to have to admit it, but that is what they believed. And I wondered what had those boys been through to feel that even though they were terrified to put their hands up, they had to say his duty is to kill an enemy. Most of my books, in fact, have very little fiction in them. They are based on real people and real events. And Georg was inspired partly by a friend of mine, the late Professor Peter Herbst. Peter, like Georg, was a boy in Germany, but his parents, unlike Georg's, realised earlier what danger he was in. They sent him to boarding school in England, but as soon as his parents were sent to a concentration camp, they could no longer pay the boarding school fees, and the school kicked him out. Peter was interned, and then he was sent to Australia on the Dunedin. Well, he was one of the Dunedin boys. And horrendous things happened to those boys. Peter said he landed in Australia having known nothing but hatred for 3 years. All he had was a pair of shorts, a shirt, bare feet. He said he was desperately, incredibly hungry. It was night. It was night when they loaded on the train, and in the train just tunneled through darkness, and he was cold and he was hungry and he had no idea where he was going. And then the train carriage door opened, and there was an Australian soldier, the first Australian he'd met. And the soldier said, "Oh, hey kid, you look cold." He took off his overcoat. He gave it to Peter. He said, "Oh, well, you keep it, mate. You need it more than I do. You just sit there and I'll see if I can rustle up some tucker." And he went away, and Peter said he came back with the tallest pile of corned beef and pickle sandwiches he had ever seen. And he said, "Oh, yeah, tuck into that, kid. You just tuck into that." And Peter said he sat in the corner of the railway carriage in the warmth of the man's coat, and he ate sandwich after sandwich after sandwich. And he said it began to grow light. And he looked out, and there was the brown grass and the blue-grey trees and the blue mountains behind. And he said he thought, this is beautiful. And he said he also thought, I am going to be Australian. And he also realised that after 3 years of nothing but kindness, nothing but terror and hatred, all it needed was that one kind act to change his life. And he thought, yes, he would be Australian and he would have a good life. And he did. He became a professor of philosophy in Australia and overseas. He founded a school. He did a great deal of good for many, many people. But he said it all went back to that one kind act. All it needed was one act of kindness to wipe out 3 years of hatred. what we do matters. It also matters too because kids need guidance with books. This is why the heart of every school is the teacher librarian. This is why books shops matter. Places where you will go and you will be guided to books. Because the problem is, most books are boring. Whenever I go to schools, usually the principal introduces me and sort of a rah-rah thing, okay, hands up, everyone who loves books, and every hand goes up in the air, who loves books? And everyone cheers, we do, stomp, 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 stomp. What I do then is I ask all the adults in the room to shut their eyes. And after the kids have finished saying, Mrs. Morrison's got her eyes open, then ask them, okay, very quickly, before they open their eyes, how many people here think books are boring? I have asked now nearly 120,000 kids that question. And in only 5 places did the majority think books were not boring. Everywhere else, including every writers' festival apart from Byron Bay where they nearly lynched me, that was one of the 5. How dare I say books are boring? Every other writers' festival, more than 80% of kids believe books are boring. Before you get too depressed about that, the next thing I ask is, who watched TV last night? Every hand goes up. Who was bored? Every hand goes up. Why did you watch it? There was nothing else to do. Or we thought something interesting might happen. Remember, adults are kids' enablers. But also, too, kids need to be shown the books they might like, because most books are boring. I have just been looking through a beautiful bookstore and I have only found 11 books I want to buy. Now, I'm someone with a book a day habit. Okay? I seriously love books, but I do not want to read most of the books in that bookshop. Partly because I'm not 3 years old. Partly because I'm not interested in the sex life of cricketers. Partly because I'm not interested in books about politicians, nor am I interested in books where one man single-handedly saves the world by hopping on one foot with a Kalashnikov through the Sahara Desert on a submarine. I do not like books like that. I don't like fantasy. I don't like zombies. In fact, there is an incredibly large list of the categories of books I do not like. And when you ask kids that, okay, who likes books about zombies? Actually, who in the audience, who likes books about zombies? Who hates books about zombies? Who likes books with vampires? Who hates books with vampires? Who likes romances? Who hates romances? Who likes books about football? Who hates books about football? Who likes books about cricket? Who hates books about cricket? Who likes books about food? Who hate books about food? And when you ask kids that, by the end of about a minute and a half, they are rolling with laughter and shock because they had never realised that their best friend has got such peculiar tastes in books. You hate books about zombies. They cannot believe it. We all like different books. It does mean that for all of us, 98% of the books that have been written on this planet are boring books. So kids need to learn to taste books. Now, I don't mean like this, okay? Books do not taste good. To taste a book, you actually look at the cover. Publishers spend a lot of money trying to make the cover fit the book. You can tell a book by its cover. You can tell it by the blurb too, because trust me, it takes almost as long to write the blurb as it does to write the novel. You taste it by actually looking through the book like that, reading a bit here and a bit there. If you're like me, you read the ending first, because I don't like unhappy endings and I don't like glib endings, and I'm not going to bother wasting my time reading a book if it's got an unhappy ending or a very glib ending. And also too, you don't have to finish it. Books aren't like broccoli. You don't have to eat every bit on your plate because it's good. Is there a single person here in the audience who reads because it is good for them? We don't. It's this secret that adults have. It is. It's an adult secret. We read because it's fun. Reading is good for us, whether we're 90 or 9. Reading is incredibly good for us, but it's not why we do it. We have got 1,001 reasons why we read, and not one of them is because it is good for us, which means you do not have to finish that book. And not just because it's boring. If it's boring, yes, of course, finish it. If you're a kid and the book you are reading is boring and you have to read it in class, don't yell, there says boring. Have a very polite, tactful word with the teacher afterwards and say, I find this book boring, can I read another one? If they say no, everyone has to read this. Don't feel that you actually have to ask your best friend what happened in it rather than read it and then say, I love this book. Instead, read the book but make notes about why it's a lousy book and why it's boring. And you will get high marks instead of low marks because it is boring. But mostly, with most books, you don't have to finish it. The last Tim Winton book I read, I loved. I really deeply loved it, venerated his writing, and reading it was superb. But it was like eating the best pizza in the world. Slice after slice after slice, and suddenly you realise that was delicious and wonderful, but I've had enough and I don't want to eat anymore. And it was the same with his book. I read 2/3 of it and I had had enough. So I read the ending to find out what happened. A book is only paper. It's not a crocodile. It's not actually going to snap your fingers off if you do not finish it. You are the boss of the book, and we need to teach kids this. We need to teach that they can read in their own way, but we also need to give them books and to show them the books that they might like. We are mostly losing our readers round about the age of 6 or 7 or early teenagerhood. Most parents now know you read to your kids, you read them bedtime stories. But round about the age of 6 or 7, they start saying, oh, you're a big girl or boy now, you can read your own books. The problem is there's a difference between the easy books the kids can read that have been written to teach them to read, that they've got the confidence to read, and the complex stories that will be the magic book and that will turn them into a reader. So we need to teach parents to keep reading to their kids until they say, this is embarrassing, please stop. But be prepared, they never will say that. Even up to a year before Dad died, he was still ringing me up and saying, oh, Jack, have you read the latest Thomas Keneally? And usually bought here, come to think of it. And he would actually read me out a chapter. He was still reading to me at 83. And in his last year of life, when he couldn't read, his kids read to him, and we should all be so lucky. Keep reading to your kids. Because when I ask kids as young as 8, who do you think should sit on the Iron Throne? Every hand comes up with an opinion. Now, I am not saying that Game of Thrones is suitable for 8-year-olds. I'm not even sure Game of Thrones is suitable for me. I watch most of it with my eyes shut. Their parents probably aren't aware the kids are watching it. They're probably watching a pirated copy on a friend's device. However, you cannot expect kids who are watching that sort of thing on TV to be satisfied with Spot's Big Adventure. They need complex books, but they are not going to get it unless someone reads to them. The teacher in the class, the teacher librarian in the library, volunteers in the library, someone in a bookshop, reading a complex book but stopping at the cliffhanger and saying, we'll read a bit more tomorrow. Because that is the way the kids discover that if you can read a sentence, you can read a paragraph. Particularly if someone has already been reading it to you, and the difficult words like a tyrannosaurus or volcano, you already know what the book is about. If you can read a paragraph, you can read a page. If you can read one page, you can read 140 pages. And kids learn not to be scared of large books. But also, try bribery. Because when you ask those kids, including those 80% who say books are boring, who has to clean their room? This weekend, okay, hands go up. Who wants to clean their room? Always a couple of goody-goodies who put their hands up and say they want to clean their room. Who would love to clean their room if while you clean your room, someone reads you your favourite story? Every hand is wildly waving in the air. If someone cooked you your favourite dinner, would you read to them while they cooked? Again, every hand is waving wildly in the air. Would you give the front seat to your bratty brother or sister if someone read you a story instead? Would you vacuum the house? Would you clean the bathroom? Kids will do a lot if you read to them. Bribery works. But it also works when kids are older, because one of the other places where we're losing our readers is late adolescence and early teenagerhood. This is when they are leaving the books they've loved before behind. They'll probably keep reading their favourite authors, but by and large, they're moving from kids' books to adult books, books that actually say what it's like to be an adult in the world. And they don't know how to do it, which is why most teenagers don't read. A young friend of mine this year had a job in a boys' boarding house as part of paying her way through university. She gets free board and lodging in return for basically being an adult there during the night. And she asked all of the boys at the beginning of the year who read books. Every single one of them said books were boring. Every single one of them said they would not read. They did not like reading books. So she went to the library, she got out a lot of books, including some probably quite unsuitable literature that she thought would be actually suitably titillating, and they would think, yes, all right, we'll read this. No, they still weren't going to read, no matter what sort of book she bought them. So she tried bribery. She said, if you read for 5 minutes at night, I will make you cocoa with marshmallows. And so they all decided that yes, in return for cocoa and marshmallows, they would read for 5 minutes. About 6 weeks ago, she sent me photographs of some of the cards the boys had prepared for her. Every single boy in the boarding house gave her a card at the end of term to thank her. Every single boy. One of them saying how he had come first in English and I never got more than 72% before. One of them actually saying how he'd got 88% in something, in history I think, and he was sure it was because he was reading. Other kids with far more personal stories about how the reading had helped them understand their lives, what was happening in their lives, problems with family, all sorts of things, far too deeply personal for me to say here. But every single boy had been changed into an avid reader. Every single boy was devouring books, forming book clubs, hungrily going through book after book after book after book. They had become readers, and all it took was bribery. Do not underestimate bribery. As a teacher at Melbourne's most expensive school told me, these are girls who are going to get a Maserati sports car for their 17th birthday, but they will do anything for a chocolate frog. Never, ever underestimate bribery. But also, bribery is worth it, because you know, it only takes a chocolate frog for 5 minutes reading. And with 5 minutes reading, if it is the right book, if it is the magic book for the kids, then that book will turn them into a reader. It's also why 2.5 years ago now, I started making a bet with kids. I bet them either $5 or a packet of chocolate frogs that either their teacher, their librarian, or as a last resort myself, we could find them a book they loved so much they could not bear to stop reading. And if we couldn't find it, I would give them $5 or a packet of chocolate frogs, their choice. And there were always these mobs of horrible little boys getting my email address and plotting to be 10 kids so they get $50. When I first started doing that, when I first became laureate, I'd actually put aside a couple of $1,000, assuming that there would be quite a few kids. Because remember, these are 80%, more than 80% of kids who think books are boring. So I assumed there were going to be at least some who were going to ask me for the money, and I was prepared to do it for 2 or 3 months until the sum I'd put aside had been used up. It's now nearly 2.5 years since I started doing it. It's about 120,000 kids because I've been doing it by video and overseas as well. Not one single kid has asked me for the money. Not one. Instead, I have got thousands of emails and letters rhapsodising over the magic book that's been found to them. The greatest problem, in fact, have been the kids who already love reading and want a list of another 20 books, please, that they need to read next. Again, please go and ask your librarian. That's not true. In fact, I do give them a list of books. But no, not one single kid. In fact, so I've now started doing that with adults as well, because often a love of books is something passed on from parents and from grandparents. So I've started doing exactly the same thing to adults. Yes, I bet you $5 or a packet of chocolate frogs. We can find you a book you love so much you can't stop reading. The first person I made that bet with was Bruce Wackley, who does the illustrations of Diary of a Wombat. He had never read a book. Never. He was quite proud of the fact he had never read a book. So he took the bet, and I sent him Deville's Longitude, which, if you haven't read it, it was actually sent to me by an editor with a note saying, "You will think this book is boring and you don't want to read it. Read it!" exclamation mark. So I did, and again, I read it in one sitting. It's gripping, but you would think it would be boring. And Bruce too was up the whole night to finish it. He couldn't put it down. I discovered later his father was a watchmaker, and in fact it pressed all the right buttons. And Bruce went on to do his PhD. He reads. Yes, you can make the book. You can make that bet with adults as well. It works. It really does work. But it's, as I said, we are kids enablers, we adults. Kids are not going to find the books by themselves. We need to teach kids how to find them, and we also need to realise that because kids' reading habits will change as they get older, it's not enough to make them into avid book readers at 3 or at 6 or at 10. This is something that you need to do almost throughout their lives, because as our lives change, the books that we love change. If anyone here has got a pile of books by their bed and they think I haven't had time to read them, you're probably actually buying the wrong books. Because if they're the books that you really love, you'll be up till 4 a.m. reading those books. It's time probably to be honest about the books that you really, really feel that you actually do want to read, and actually getting those instead, because then you wouldn't have the pile. We need to be honest about the books that we love. But no, 120,000 kids, and not one of them, not a single one of them, has not been turned into an avid reader just by finding that magic book. It is difficult, I think, in fact it is impossible to quantify the value of reading. We know it so deeply that it's difficult to articulate it. When you are the people of the books, it is so difficult to articulate to an economist why this matters. At the moment, the Productivity Commission is perpetuating the myth that books in Australia cost more than they do overseas. And, you know, it's rather surprising. I've sort of said this indignantly. Oh, they're saying the books are more expensive. And I've been amazed how many people actually believe that you can buy books more cheaply overseas. You could in 2008, but since 2008, the price of books in Australia has come down by 25%, with the fluctuations in the dollar, etc. Now, books in Australia are no more expensive, and in many cases, they are cheaper than books overseas. But the myth continues that somehow it's cheaper overseas, possibly because if you go to Amazon and you click on a book, it's going to a book which costs say $16 in Australia, you might find costs only $10 on Amazon. Or shall we say $12. What you're not factoring in is in fact that the Australian dollar is only worth actually 69 US cents. So in fact you're probably paying more for it there. But once these myths take hold, it is so easy to perpetuate them. Parallel importation, the incredible myth that if we get rid of it, books are going to be cheaper. It didn't happen in New Zealand. When they got rid of parallel importation, books in fact got more expensive, not cheaper, and the publishing industry is got smaller and smaller and smaller, with incredibly bad consequences for a very small economy. In Canada, when they got rid of it, again, book prices did not go down. In educational books, the prices of books in fact went up because they had to be imported, and again, dramatic detrimental effects on the publishing industry, which earns $2 billion every year to the Australian economy. It's this strange, you could only say this strange ideology that needs to keep perpetuating the myth that books are cheaper overseas, and if we get rid of parallel importation, we are going to have cheaper books. We're not. They're not going to be cheaper, they're probably going to be more expensive, and Australia is going to lose out on probably about $1 billion a year of export income, $2 billion to the Australian economy, and in the creative industries, 1 job in 4 is in the creative, the copyrighted industries in Australia. It's massive. But we don't use those arguments. We use the arguments that books matter. We use the arguments that this tell us who we are and who we can be. We are so passionately people of the books that we don't give the economic arguments. And that means that an economist can look at our passionate defence of our industry and say that we are simply doing it from sentiment. We have not done the numbers. And on the contrary, they are the ones who cannot substantiate it. They are the ones who have actually not done the work. They are the ones who have not looked at the comparative prices of books overseas and in Australia, who have looked at the economic impact. They are the ones who have actually not added up the jobs. They are the ones who cannot substantiate their claims in any way whatsoever. But we are the ones who are supposed to be sentimental. Can it be a coincidence that so many major authors in Australia have come out in defence of parallel importation? Do they really think that these people who have got the intelligence and the breadth of knowledge and data and capacity to actually bring ideas together, to actually put them into a major book with international reputation, can they really think that we are so stupid as to defend something simply from sentiment? We are not stupid. People of the books are in fact more intelligent, and literally it is these books that are making us intelligent. But also they are Australian books that show us who we are, where we have come from, and who we can be. I'd like to finish tonight by reading you a book. I want to read you the beginning and the ending of a book which won't come out until next year. It's the sequel to Hitler's Daughter and Pennies for Hitler, and I think it's the most important book I have written, and I was terrified until literally 5 minutes before I came here tonight, I got the email from Lisa Berriman at HarperCollins, having read the manuscript, to evaluate it, because I did not know this. As I said, for me, this is by far the most important book that I have written. Hitler's Daughter was a book of questions. How do you know good from evil? If you're 14 years old and evil is happening, what can you do? No one listens to 14-year-olds. If you are Hitler's daughter, do you need to say you are sorry for the evil your father has done? I thought Hitler's Daughter was a one-off till I got a letter from a 14-year-old boy from a school for kids with severe intellectual handicaps. He had seen the play Hitler's Daughter, so he read the book. It was the first book he'd read, and he wrote me a letter. It was the first letter he had ever written, and it just said, "Dear Jackie French, what I have learned from this book is to be very wary of anyone who makes you angry. Gov James." I hadn't realised that was in the book, but of course it was. And I'd also realised the answer I'd been looking for since I was 10 years old. That is how Hitler did it. Hatred is contagious. And so that is Pennies for Hitler. That is a book about hatred is contagious, but so is kindness. And that's something we know very well as the people of the books. But the next one, Goodbye, Mr. Hitler, is different. It's a book about forgiveness. And as I said, it's only tonight, having got Lisa's assessment of the book, that I've got the courage to read out the beginning and the ending of the book. But it was inspired by asking the volunteers at the Holocaust Museum in Sydney why you, who have suffered so much evil and horror in your youth, how is it that you spend your days now volunteering and doing good? How is it that you are good people? And I expected rather sentimentally that they would answer, oh, if you are a good, kind person, you are more likely to survive. They didn't tell me that. On the contrary, every single one of them told me that after the war, they hated. They hated deeply and passionately, and it burned in them. But every single one of them had made the decision, for one reason or another, that they had to put away the hate. As one man said, it was the morning they put my son into my arms. And I looked into his eyes, and I realised that my heart was too full of hate. And I realised I had to put the hate aside and be a man of love. And he said I had to do it for my son. I had to be a man of love for my son. And every single one of them said that every day it is still a battle to be someone of love, not hatred. But they also said it was important. So this is the beginning of Goodbye, Mr. Hitler. My name is Johann. This is the story of how the ogre swallowed me when I was 10 years old. He chewed up Helga and Frau Timmins too. The ogre chewed up 40 million people until they were dead, but I do not know 44 million people. So this is the story of me and Frau Timmins and Helga. This is the story of how we learnt to live. And the ending of the book. I am Johann. I am a man of love, not hate. I love my wife, my children, my patients. Here in the park, with my family and friends, I tell the story of the ogre too, the one called Mr. Hitler. The ogre is dead at last, for me, for Frau Timmins and for Helga. But others had to carry him in their hearts all their lives. When an ogre swallows you, it is not easy to be free. The world has many ogres. Sometimes, like Mr. Hitler, they do not even know that they are ogres, but think that they are the hero of the story. But I have learned this, and the years since Opa told me that words in the heart cannot be burned. When you see injustice, hunt until you find the ogre. Stand firm and grab your spear. My spears are made of words. Yours may be different. But when you find your spears, do not hesitate or look away. If too many look away, the ogres win. It is not easy fighting ogres. No one who fights an ogre comes away unscarred, even if you cannot see the wounds. And so you owe the ogre hunters this. Once the ogre is defeated, sit down upon the quiet earth and try to understand the ogre's anguish and their twisted fear. Only by understanding can we stop ogres rising in our midst. When you understand, forgive, and then stand up and live. Live well. And that is what we people of the book can give our children. We can give them the stories that show them the past. We can give them the stories so they understand the present. We can give them the stories that show them who they can be to create the future. A book can change a child's life. A book can change the world. We are the people of the books, and this is still the most powerful force that humanity has got. The power to show children how to live and give well. Thank you.
That was wonderful, and I think we're all so happy to have heard someone who's so passionate about books and reading, and who is such a passionate advocate for bribery.
Yes.
It was great. And if anyone has any questions, if they'd like to raise their hand, I'll come around with the mic. Anyone? Don't be shy. No? Yeah?
Hello, Jackie. Thanks for that. A couple of years ago, when you were talking about the Matilda series, you indicated that there would be more to come.
Yes, with the Matilda series, there were originally going to be 3 books and then 4. The 6th book will come out on the 1st of December, and then every year that I live from now on, there will be a Matilda book on the 1st of December every year. Instead of having leaps of 20 years between it, there are now only going to be leaps of 1 or 2 years between it, because I've realised I planned to stop the book in 1975. It was the story of our nation, starting with Matilda in 1892, with the fight for universal suffrage in Australia. And then I realised that actually history didn't stop in 1975 just because I became an adult, and also that I don't want to stop the series. So no, If Blood Should Stay in the Wattle will come out next on the 1st of December. It's set 1972 to 1975, and for those old enough to remember, those are the years of the Whitlam government, the election and the dismissal. But also too, that 1975 was the year when blood did not stain the wattle. Australia is rather unusual in that even at that moment, when passions were rising so high, blood did not stain the wattle. And for Matilda, whose father was the unionist who died at the Billabong, etc., and also Matilda. Matilda in her old age thinking, why don't they storm Parliament, why don't they do something, and suddenly realising that no, that on the contrary, she is extraordinarily proud to live in a country where the people do not storm Parliament, but instead they elect a government. So yes, it is about how blood did not stain the water, which actually makes it seem incredibly boring. And there is also a guru who actually I won't talk about that, but yes, believe me, it sounds deeply politically boring, but it is not. And apologies to everyone who lives on a commune, because I have made a few actually, they're not exaggerations about what it was like to be on a commune. It really is exactly like that to get on a commune. But I have actually collected all the more ridiculous elements of communal living to put in that book as well. So apologies to anyone who ever thought that it might be worthwhile living on a commune. I apologise for the smell of patchouli, the fact that domes always leak, and that fertilising with baby poo may be natural, but then so is hepatitis. Any other questions?
Is there any other questions? They're probably
Okay.
going to ask you by themselves.
No worries. Okay, and look, thank you very much. And look, thank you too for book links. I think the word book links says it all. I was trying to work out, in fact, what book links does, to actually tell people what book links does, and I realised you couldn't, because book links actually does too much. It is just actually those two words. It is books and links between people and between books, and yes, it is 1,001 or 1,000,001 links, and also potential links. So Jenny might be able to tell you what book links can, but I can't, and I think that is the joy of book links. It is entirely, wonderfully, gloriously open-ended. And thank you enormously for asking me to be your patron.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming. Jackie will be at the back of the shop signing books if anyone has yet to have their book signed. And once again, thank you so much, Jackie, for coming to Riverbend. We've loved it so much.
Thank you, Jackie, so much for that wonderful address. I first heard you speak at the Warana Writers Festival many years ago. And, and I can remember bouncing up to you and saying, "Oh, do you speak in schools?" and was so impressed, and I still am today. I'd like you to accept this little gift from Booklinks as a thank you, and hope that when you look at it, it will remind you of your early years in Queensland. I'm not sure if you're any good at construction, but it's a build-your-own Queenslander house.
My husband will love it.
Well, that's what I thought. I thought that would work out. I thought Brian would have fun with that.
I think you will.
If anyone is interested in having Jackie visit their school or public library, Booklinks has her travelling suitcases available for loan, along with the cases of Narelle Oliver, Gregory Rogers, Kerry Argent, Michael Jared Bauer and James Maloney. They're free to borrow, and they're full of all sorts of amazing things, first scripts, video. We went down to Araluen Valley to Jackie's place and shot.
And Shirley spent a whole evening collecting wombat droppings.
Wombat droppings, yeah.
With Jenny's sister, with devotion about the call of duty.
And spent a lot of time assembling those cases. So they are free to borrow. The only thing is you have to then either pay to return it to base or to the next school or library that's borrowing it. I'd also, if you want to find out more about Booklinks, there are some brochures in on the table at the bench where you're buying your books, and also some borrowing forms if you want to borrow the cases. We have got bookings for Jackie's up till about Book Week, I think, at the moment, so beyond that. And also to remind everyone that the Booklinks annual lecture in children's literature will be held on June the 24th, Thursday night. The 23rd? 24th? It's the Thursday night before school finishes, that's what I can remember. And our new children's laureate who took over from Jackie, Lee Hobbs, is going to give that address on visual literacy and humour in children's literature. I'd like to thank the staff at Riverbend Books here tonight, and I wish you all a good evening and a safe trip home. Thank you.